Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Karima Ramji. I serve as Associate Director of International Indigenous and Accessibility at the University of Victoria's Co-op Education Program and Career Services. I want to start by acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen peoples, which includes the Songhees and Kweswapsum peoples, on whose territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. It is my pleasure today to welcome you to our second session for the day, titled Strengthening Recruitment and Retention with the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub, presented by our Indigenous Co-op and Career Coordinator, David Busch. David has set aside 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session for your questions. Please submit your questions through the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. If you don't see the Q&A option, please click on the More button at the bottom and you should see it there. With that, I think we're ready to start. David, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Karima. So as Karima had mentioned, I'll be presenting on strengthening recruitment and retention with the Indigenous Work Resource Hub. This resource hub was led with a project team of Juliana Nielsen, Renee Levernache, and Karima Ramji, who all still work at UVic. And I was not a part of the project team, but have come in and really utilized the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub in my work supporting Indigenous students as well as employers who are seeking to hire Indigenous students. So we'll jump into it. I appreciate Karima taking the time to welcome us and start us off in a good way with a territory acknowledgement. I don't want to duplicate efforts here, so I will not give another territory acknowledgement, but when I do give this territory acknowledgement, I don't really like to think of it as a formality or something to gloss over, just really taking the time to think about why we give territory acknowledgements. It's a reminder of our relationship with the land and to the work that we do here at UVic, especially when we're talking about the topic of the day, which is Indigenous recruitment and retention, which happens on Indigenous land and with Indigenous students and communities whose voices and strengths are vital to our shared future. And so if you'd like to take a moment to think about the lands that you're joining from and whose traditional territory those are part of, I would encourage you to do so in the chat function. I'll just give you a moment to do that. So self-location, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, this is a quote taken from our Indigenous WIL Resource Hub. Self-location is a deeply personal process. For many, self-locating is a way of acknowledging and honoring relationships with relatives, lands, and communities. By reflecting on the relationships, self-location can also be helpful in identifying social position. So for me, when I think about self-location, it's looking at who you are and where you're from and how you come to be in this space today. And so before I give my self-location, I just want to quickly mention my role at UVic. I'm the Indigenous Co-op and Career Coordinator, and I've been in my role for about 3.5 years. Before that, I was the Indigenous Student Recruitment Officer, and I've been at UVic for a total of 5 years now. But in my current role, in a nutshell, I support Indigenous students from across all program areas that are eligible for co-op, as well as on the flip side of that, I support employers who are interested in hiring Indigenous students for cooperative education or career opportunities. So I'll leave it there and give my self-location. So on my mother's side, I'm Niska and Gitxsan, and on my father's side, I'm Scottish and German. I belong to the Yukon clan of the Niska Nation, and I was born and raised on traditional Stamanis territory, also known as Ladysmith on Vancouver Island. My traditional territory is in the Nass Valley of northwestern BC. And after I graduated university, I worked for the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council, supporting remote First Nations communities. After that, I worked for a couple of years for the provincial government, and I draw on my past work experience as well as my life experience to support Indigenous students here at UVic and work alongside employers like yourselves who are joining the session to create meaningful and reciprocal co-op and career opportunities for students at UVic. So the session outline, sorry, didn't realize that was there. The session outline, we already started with a welcome territory acknowledgement. Again, thank you, Karima. We'll start off with a small question. Why does Indigenous recruitment and retention matter? And then joking, obviously, that's a big question, maybe why you're all here today. How do you fit in the TRC's calls to action and how you can work towards answering the TRC's calls to action? What is the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub? The tools and resources you can use to strengthen your recruitment and retention. And then lastly, reflecting on where you are at as an organization and where students are coming to you at as well. So we'll jump into it. Why does this matter to you as an employer? Why does Indigenous recruitment and retention matter? So first of all, from a community and demographic perspective, Indigenous students, Indigenous youth are the fastest growing population in Canada, according to Stats Can. And we are seeing this at UVic as well. So last year, as well as this most recent year, we've seen our largest cohort of Indigenous students coming into UVic, which is really great to see. And these students will be bringing skills and ideas and perspectives that will be strengthening your organizations for years to come. So students that are going to be graduating university over the next few years, the cohorts are going to be larger and larger. Second, it's about fulfilling commitments to reconciliation. Supporting Indigenous recruitment and retention is a tangible way that you can live out those values and respond to the TRC's calls to action. Thirdly, there's a business and innovation case, diversity driving creativity and better decision-making. Organizations that build trust and inclusion see stronger teams and more sustainable results. And then finally, there's an alignment with policy and law. In 2019, BC enacted the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or DRIPA, which is the province's commitment to aligning all laws and policies with UNDRIP, or the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. So how do you, as an employer, fit into the TRC's calls to action? So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC, gave 94 calls to action, and a few of them, well, several of them directly connect with the work we do in co-op, as well as the work that you do as employers. So for example, call number 7 urges us to eliminate educational and employment gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians, as well as call 92-2 ask corporate sectors, that includes all of us employers, to ensure that Indigenous peoples have equitable access to jobs, training, and education opportunities, and that communities gain long-term benefit from economic development. And then finally, 92-3, it also calls on organizations to provide education for management and staff about Indigenous histories, treaties, and the legacy of residential schools, and to develop intercultural competencies and anti-racism skills. So these are powerful calls to action, and that puts responsibility on all of our shoulders. They remind us that reconciliation isn't just a public sector, federal or provincial responsibility. It's something that every employer can contribute to through their hiring and mentorship and workplace culture. And something that we're obviously working towards in co-op as well. So what is the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub? So Indigenous WIL, so WIL is short for Work-Integrated Learning, and that includes co-op. WIL is like an umbrella that includes co-op, as well as practical internships and field schools. And the WIL Hub was created to strengthen Indigenous student access, retention, and success in WIL learning programs. So this project was a collaboration between the project team at UVic, as well as some of our partner institutions. You can see them listed at the bottom there, and I'll go over them in the next slide. This was a one-time funding received by the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills to see this project come to life. And the approach that was taken was grounded in both research and relationship. They started with a literature review, as well as a BC-wide survey that was sent out to WIL practitioners. and also a publication in the International Journal for Work-Integrated Learning. And finally, that informed the development of the resources. What makes this resource hub different is that it's living and breathing. It's not a static toolkit. It's a network that grows from contributions from across other post-secondary institutions from across our province. And the goal is to reduce barriers, improve Indigenous students' educational experiences, and long-term success in the labor market. And so there's resources on here that are geared towards students, and then some that are geared towards employers. And then obviously as WIL practitioners who support Indigenous students and employers, that can be utilized by WIL practitioners as well. I will just acknowledge the partners that contributed into the realization of this. Okanagan College, UBC, Simon Fraser University, Thompson River University, Quantum Polytechnic, and Langara College. As well as there was an advisory team from the community at UVic, which included Elder Barb Hume, Dr. Jeff Horntassel, Ruth Young, Dr. Rob Hancock, Yvette Sellers, Hannah Genties, and Dakota Nelson. So there was a broad perspective, which included students, professors, and elders, as well as a manager of Indigenous initiatives. So there was quite a broad, diverse set of perspectives that contributed to this. It had our project team, as well as the partners and the advisor team at UVic. So I'm just going to play a short 1-minute video by Juliana Nielsen that kind of goes over some of the recommendations and literature review findings.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juliana Nielsen, and I am a guest of Cree, Ojibwe, Métis, and settler ancestry on the territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples. My colleagues Renee Livernosh, Karima Ramji, and I present an article that identifies existing barriers to Indigenous WIL, as well as unrealized opportunities to expand and transform WIL approaches and practices. We offer 10 recommendations for the development of resources and strategic Indigenous WIL initiatives, and we highlight the process we undertook to create a publicly accessible Indigenous WIL resource hub, IRH. Our work also identifies scholarly limitations and affirms the value of on-the-ground and community-held knowledge. We believe that initiatives to act on opportunities and address barriers to Indigenous WIL must be needs-based and community-specific.
So from the literature review findings came 10 recommendations. I won't go through and read out every recommendation, and the text is quite small in here, so you probably can't see them. But if you are interested, it will be on the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub. And from these recommendations, this is something that we've been implementing with the strategies to see realized at the University of Victoria. So the resources responded to insights from the literature review, to barriers, on barriers and opportunities for Indigenous work-integrated learning, and the survey that was distributed to WIL practitioners to assess current Indigenous WIL programs and supports. So there was a lot of work beforehand that went into seeing these resources kind of come to life, and they were informed by lots of different perspectives. So this is a list of the resources. I've bolded and italicized some of the ones that we'll be going over today and that are specific to employers who are seeking to hire Indigenous students and strengthen their recruitment and retention of Indigenous, whether it's Indigenous students or Indigenous recent graduates. So the first is tokenism. There's a number of resources there on the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub on tokenism. What is tokenism? I'm sure everyone here has an idea of what it is. At its worst, tokenism occurs when employers are intentionally using the presence of an Indigenous person in the workplace to deflect accusations of racism and discrimination. But even well-intentioned employers might contribute to tokenism where Indigenous employees might be put into uncomfortable or exploited positions, or assumed to be representatives or spokespersons of their community, or even experts on all things Indigenous or Indigenous culture. So when an organization finds out that they have an Indigenous person or an Indigenous student, they might assume those things, even though it's well-intentioned, it can still come off as tokenistic. A recommendation that I make to employers who are seeking to hire Indigenous students is to reflect on the why. So having that clear sense of why you're seeking to hire an Indigenous student in the first place. It could be for their knowledge or experience as an Indigenous person. It could be you're seeking to answer the TRC's calls to action, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation. Or it could be a part of your equity action plan. But once you have that reason, I would recommend including that in your job description. Create a little section as to why you're seeking to hire an Indigenous student. And that way the student or recent graduate knows what they're signing up for and what the expectations are. It's a clear understanding between employer and employee that the tokenism would come into play when a student reads the job description, knows what they're signing up for, and then once they enter the workspace, they end up taking on the Indigenous portfolio or becoming that spokesperson, or get put into those situations where they are speaking for the all Indigenous peoples of their community. So those are those uncomfortable situations, and those are things that can be avoided with the proper measures put into place. So if you're seeking to hire Indigenous students or recent graduates, there's special hiring programs. And so I've worked with employers who weren't aware that you could even implement a special hiring program. And yes, you can. And the special hiring program may be introduced when the determined group is underrepresented in the workplace. Increasing Indigenous representation is a part of the company organization's equity plan, or when the job requires knowledge that a designated group member holds. So those Indigenous knowledge or intercultural competencies are crucial to the role or the job. And then there's different language used depending on the needs of the position. So the preferential versus a limited hire. Preferential is ideally the successful candidate is Indigenous, but a non-Indigenous applicant can do the job as well. And then a limited hire would be only an Indigenous applicant would be suitable for this position, and that's due to the knowledge or lived experience that they might have. So an example of some language that could be used in a job description: pursuant to section 42 of the BC Human Rights Code, preference will be given to, or the selection will be limited to, if it's a limited hire, Indigenous applicants. And so through the adoption of the BC DRIPA in 2019, UNDRIP provides a provincial framework for reconciliation. The 22nd article of UNDRIP supports the rights of Indigenous peoples to special programs that aim to improve their economic and social conditions. So under provincial law, this is legal to implement special hiring programs to hire Indigenous peoples for your organization. So self-locating and self-identified. This poster and resource is more for Indigenous students, but it's something that Indigenous students grapple with when they are applying for roles. Often as employers, when you're hiring Indigenous students, you'll want them to kind of self-identify in their application package. And as an Indigenous person going into that role, you have to grapple with, should I self-identify? When should I self-identify? And how should I self-identify? And this resource kind of goes through that. And it's something when I work with employers and with students I recommend that students self-identify in their cover letter of their application when they're introducing themselves. And it should be noted that sometimes Indigenous students would rather get the job on their own accord. But when I work with students, I usually recommend, if they're applying for an Indigenous specific role, the employer has highlighted that hopefully in their job description why they're seeking to hire an Indigenous student, and for Indigenous students to lean into their cultural identity and utilize that if the role aligns with their values and the experience that they're seeking to get. Again, this is more for students, but for an employer, it's good to know the difference between self-locating and self-identifying and what you're asking of students. So this resource is one of my favorites for employers. It's questions from Indigenous students for prospective employers. And this came out, so a while ago, the federal government was really looking to hire Indigenous students. And this was actually when Renee Levernosh was in my role. And so she had the idea, she invited them to host a lunch and connect with students, but they didn't have budget, unfortunately. And so she said, I'll gather some questions that they'll have for you. And so this was presented to UVic's Native Students Union, and they put together some questions that they had for prospective employers. So I pulled out a couple. I know the text is really small here. If you're interested in reading all of the questions, again, it will be on the Indigenous World Resource Hub, and we'll post that in the chat. But I utilize these when I connect with employers for the first time. So when I connect them, I ask, have you hired an Indigenous student in the past? If you have, how is that experience for you and for the student? And if not, do you have a clear sense of why you're seeking to hire an Indigenous applicant now? And then from there, after some discussion, asking about, is your organization committed to ongoing training and education that seeks to develop an understanding of Indigenous histories and the impacts of colonization? So Indigenous students are really curious, is your work is this a tokenistic hire, or you're actually committed to reconciliation and decolonization and understanding the histories and the impacts of those on Indigenous peoples and the Indigenous applicants coming into your workplace? So this is just a continuation, and this is pulled from the bottom section, questions about hiring and retention. So if an Indigenous person is hired for their intercultural competencies, how will they be supported in the workplace? This is a really great question, because it kind of leans into, are you hiring a student or a recent graduate? Are they going to be the only Indigenous person there? And are they going to be relied upon for their expertise in Indigenous cultural competencies? If they are, it's great for them to have a network, or better yet, a mentor for them to work through challenging work situations with, and not be kind of siloed in that role. The second question is, the work of reconciliation, diversity and inclusion, and anti-racism needs to be championed by non-Indigenous leadership in an organization. And so the question is, who in your workplace places non-Indigenous leadership or executive who leads this work? So is there a champion at your work that is kind of moving the needle and working towards this? Or is everyone at your work kind of looking to defer this work to the Indigenous person that's hired? And so if it's the latter, that's not setting the Indigenous applicant up for success. There needs to be other people there who are working towards that common goal. Where is your organization at? So this is another important thing to reflect on, and you might not know, but where are you at with your recruitment and retention strategies? Are you just starting out and don't even know where to start? Have you hired and retained Indigenous students and recent graduates before? Maybe you found something that really works for you. And then finally, this could be you as well. Maybe you've tried hiring, but haven't had success yet, and reflecting on maybe why that is. You're not connecting to the applicants for some reason. Maybe the job descriptions aren't speaking to them. Maybe you weren't aware of special hiring programs. So reflecting on where you're at, and then utilizing the things that we've been talking about to enhance that strategy. I also wanted to mention where Indigenous students and recent graduates are at and where they're coming to your organization from. So again, I'll reiterate, having a clear sense of why you're seeking to hire student or recent graduate, and include that in your job description. This will reduce the risks of tokenization. It creates a clear understanding of what's expected of the student, and that the student is okay with coming to this role and having to be relied upon for their lived experience and their intercultural competencies. Due to Canada's colonial history, not all Indigenous students have the same cultural knowledge. Some Indigenous students will be coming to your organization, having grown up in community, learned from elders and knowledge keepers, and been really connected with their culture from when they were born all the way till when they left their home community. And then for other students, they're really just discovering their Indigenous identity in university, and maybe they're coming to your organization wanting to explore that more. And so it's a big ask for them to be relied upon as an Indigenous expert when they're just figuring out who they are and where they come from. There will be students who lead with their cultural identity, and that's probably those students who I mentioned who grew up in community and pursue work that allows them to lean into their intercultural competencies. But not all Indigenous students want to apply for Indigenous specific opportunities. So if you're serious about hiring Indigenous students and recent graduates, don't be discouraged by the fact that maybe you only got a few applicants and there wasn't a successful candidate. It shouldn't be this one and done. Oh, we didn't hire anyone, so let's move on. Indigenous students, I often refer back to there was an Indigenous student in engineering who mentioned this to me, and it kind of stuck with me. She mentioned that she was an Indigenous engineer. She was an engineering student and led with her cultural identity. But she mentioned to me that not all Indigenous students want to do that. Some Indigenous students just want to be engineers who happen to be Indigenous. So that kind of highlights to me that not all Indigenous students are looking for those roles. Sometimes they just want to be in a role and they just happen to be Indigenous. They don't. It's a lot more to be asked of to be relying on your Indigenous identity day in and day out versus working a job where you create those skills and abilities through your education rather than maybe your lived experience. So that's kind of where students are coming to your organization at. It's there's a broad spectrum of students and experiences and cultural competencies, and so meet students where they're at, get to know them, and try not to paint them as a brush of coming. All students are coming to you, maybe with the same experience or knowledge. It's going to be a diverse set of students and applicants, and getting to know them is first before kind of delegating the work would probably be the best way to approach it. So this one, this is the poster for responding to the TRC's calls to action. Again, just reiterating, these are printable posters that you can hang up, and how your organization fits into answering the TRC's calls to action. I will mention there is a great video on the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub. It's the employer's response to the TRC's calls to action. It's about a 14-minute video, but definitely worth a watch. It's a co-op employer, Coastal Restoration Society. They had hired 2 Indigenous students, Hannah and Anakin. And in the video, both students talk about why their co-op experience was so meaningful, and then their supervisor as well talks about it. So it's that reciprocal relationship of a non-Indigenous employer hiring Indigenous students, and talking about why the work experience was so great for all parties involved. Lastly, I will mention that if you are starting out and figuring out your Indigenous recruitment and retention strategy, co-op is a great place to start, and we have funding for employers through a wage subsidy called the SFL Indigenous Wage Subsidy Program. It's a $5,000 wage subsidy that provides employers hiring Indigenous students, provided to employers hiring Indigenous students, but it's also available to Indigenous employers that are hiring Indigenous or non-Indigenous students. And the stipulations are it must meet the requirements for co-op. And so that's like 420 hours of work experience. The student has to have a direct supervisor that's able to participate in a worksite visit. And we'll include the link for that application form in the chat. And so if you're interested, again, please connect with me and we can kind of go over that. And I'll leave my contact information here. If you're exploring Indigenous recruitment and retention, don't know where to start, or if you have a hiring strategy, but maybe it needs to be revised or looked at, or you want to get involved in co-op, I would encourage you to reach out to me. My contact information is there. Email, you can connect with me by email or phone. And we'll leave it there. And I'll take questions or comments or anything in between.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A section. You can find that under the More tab on the taskbar in the bottom, or if you feel comfortable, feel free to hop on the mic.
Maybe I can start us off, David. Can you tell us a little bit about band funding and how that works and what are some of the nuances around that? And I know this information is in the resource hub, but perhaps you could shed some light on that. Thanks.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Often First Nation students are funded through their band to come to post-secondary. That can be a barrier for them to participate in co-op. If it is, I always encourage students to connect with me and I can connect with their education coordinator. Where it has been a barrier for students is that the education coordinators don't have a policy in place for handling co-op, and often they view students working as a way to, so when they see students finding work in their field of study, there's been instances of students having their funding revoked by their band, and I think it's just due to a lack of knowledge around what co-op is and how it's actually work-integrated learning, where students take what they're learning in the classroom and then apply it in the work setting and then go back into the classroom. So there is resources on there that I provide to education coordinators who look after funding for Indigenous students. So it's really, I think about providing that education and understanding around this is an educational model. Students are here in the classroom and then go into the workplace to work, and they happen to get paid, but it's not them graduating university and no longer needing funding. So that has been a barrier, but we're looking at reducing that barrier through education and providing the resources on the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub to the education coordinators who look after the band funding.
Thank you, David. And it's my understanding that every band office looks at it in a different way, right? And so the education becomes so important to help them understand.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. The self-determination, each nation, each band will be looking after their own funding, and how they handle it is going to look different. I think ideally students will get their co-op fees covered, and then once they're being paid, they'll have their living allowance go dormant, and then when they're back in the classroom, their tuition and living allowance will be reinstated, and then kind of alternating if they're going through the full co-op program of doing 3 to 4 co-op experiences. To me, that's ideally how it works, but some students, it will look different depending on the band, and that's totally up to the band. What we can do is provide the resources and the education for them to make an informed decision.
Thank you. Okay, it sounds like, are there any other questions, or is it okay to wrap up? Amelia, do you see anything in the Q&A?
I don't currently see anything in the Q&A, but I did see someone unmute.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to send a message, but I thought I'll just ask a question. Although I enabled my video, but I don't see myself here. I don't know why, but
We see you, Shabazz.
all right. Okay. Thank you. Hi, David. Thank you for providing that information. I think we
Mhm.
have connected through email as well earlier. And I was just wondering, every year we do access University of Victoria along with other universities to identify some Indigenous talent for co-op placements. So far, we are not successful.
Mhm.
But that made me wonder that we are putting in so much effort in identifying the right student. So there might not be a pool of students available for that particular program that I am looking for.
Mhm.
So is there any way to identify what students, Indigenous students are present in which programs so that we have some idea about the number of students available and then we can allocate reasonable resources to identify them or use resources for some other activities as well. So
Yeah.
in short, the short answer is there any way to identify the pool before approaching them?
Yeah, at UVic, there definitely is. I can't speak for other institutions, and I don't know how they handle their data, but I'll speak for UVic. We have on our institutional planning and analysis, we keep track of the Indigenous students based on program area. And so each program area will have the number of Indigenous students in that program. And we also track within co-op the students coming and participating in the co-op program from each program area as well. And so when I connect with employers who are interested in hiring Indigenous students, I often will do some expectation setting and we'll go through that data because I've had times where there's been an employer who's interested in hiring third or fourth year college students. And so when I go through the data, I show them that there's 50 Indigenous students in that program, and of those 50, maybe half of them are eligible for co-op this semester. And if you're looking at third and fourth year students, there maybe is a dozen students that would meet those specifications. And so that highlights to them it's a really specific program and or not program, it's a specific demographic. And so if I usually recommend if you can cast your net out a little bit wider, if you think Indigenous applicants from other program areas could do the job as well, it's better to make the program, the co-op opportunity available to as many students as possible. And then meet the students where they're at and see if they're, interview them, look at their application and see from there if they would be a good applicant or a good successful applicant for that position. So in short, yes, we do keep track of the data across the institution as well as in co-op. And that I believe Karima just put it in the chat for our institutional data based on what program areas Indigenous students are participating in.
All right, great. Thank you. Probably I'll connect offline with you to know more about that thing. Just my last comment or question is this data available for only for undergrad students, or do you also maintain a database for graduate students?
The database for graduate students, it's by faculty. So we have the Faculty of Graduate Studies kind of clumped as one. So we do have the number of Indigenous students in graduate studies, but I don't believe, and Karima or Joy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we have it based on individual programs. So it's kind of grouped as one faculty, and that's the Faculty of Graduate Studies.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you, we'd have to take a look, but I'm sure that there's data on, Indigenous students. All the data at UVic is divided by faculty. And so I would assume that within the Faculty of Graduate Studies, there would be some classification of which programs they're pursuing. That would be my guess.
All right. Thanks.
But yeah, the link is in there and oh, there you go. Joy is saying that's correct. So whether that's to my comment or to David's comment.
I think it was to mine.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. If there are no other questions, Shabazz, thank you for those questions that were enlightening for all of us, I think. I want to just thank David for this very practical session that encourages us all to reflect on our commitment to the TRC calls to action. Also provides resources for employers to navigate the various aspects of workplace inclusion as it relates to Indigenous engagement. So thank you very much, David. And to all of you, our audience, I thank you for joining us. Please be sure to bookmark the Indigenous WIL Resource Hub on your browser, as it is a very useful resource. It's something that we developed some years ago, and it continues to benefit our community, not just locally, but also globally, as they strive to engage Indigenous employees in their workplaces.